Jay Jendra, on behalf of the co-chairs and the entire convention committee, I'd like to welcome you all to YJA Day. We cannot begin to express how excited we are at the turnout for this event with over 1,100 people registering as of last night. While we weren't able to hold our usual convention this year in Dallas, it gives us the unique opportunity to create something new and something different. To that end, we want to thank everyone that's made today possible, our speakers, our donors, longtime supporters, the entire convention committee, and of course you, our YJ family. We'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our generous donors and sponsors. Our grand co-sponsors, the Jain Society of North Texas and the Jain Center of New Jersey, have generously donated to provide this event free of charge to each of you and everyone tuning in. Thank you so much also to the Jain Center of Northern California, the Jain Center of Greater Phoenix for their support and donation. Finally, we would like to thank Chintav Shah and family, Harish Shah and family, and Noesh Duggley and family for their generous donations. Your contributions are a direct investment into our youth and the future of Jainism in North America.
At this moment, we also want to acknowledge our 41-person planning committee, who has spent the last 6 weeks since our convention cancellation working around the clock to put together this spectacular day for all of you. Our team has been met with a number of challenges, and yet they've been able to maintain courage and optimism during the toughest times. Everything you see and experience today is a result of their hard work, ingenuity, and passion. Thank you to our incredible convention committee for all that you've done in making this unforgettable experience possible. We are so proud of you.
We have attendees of all ages today, from as young as 10 all the way to the age of 79, and they're joining from across the country, with some even coming from abroad. We ask that you continue to join us throughout the rest of the day for a variety of social programming, like a virtual escape room and a community showcase, as well as engaging sessions from speakers from all walks of life. Our goal for YJA Day 2020 is to bring our community together for a day of learning and reflection. Our spiritual journeys are continuous, and we need to make a conscious effort to progress with purpose as individuals and as a society every single day. We hope that the materials and experiences shared today by our speakers will help each of you take one step further towards defining your purpose in life.
So far today, we have had the privilege of partaking in a yoga class instructed by spiritual devotee and teacher Avni Talsania, learning more about peace in the pandemic from Tejal Shah, revisioning 2020 through the lens of Jainism with Anya Gandhi and Sonali Vakharia, and divesting from racism with Brittany Oliver. We are so excited to have even more speakers who will be joining us later in the day today. You all are in for a real treat, and we are so proud to bring you this experience. With that, we will now turn it over to our Daytime Programming Committee to introduce our keynote speaker, the one and only Maulik Pancholy.
Jai Janendra, everyone. My name is Harshita Jain, and on behalf of the Daytiming Program Committee and the YJA 2020 Convention Committee as a whole, I'm incredibly excited to introduce our YJA Day keynote address, a conversation with Maulik Pancholy, moderated by Mihir Shah. Today, Maulik will share with us the trajectory of his life and how his experiences have shaped his acting career, anti-bullying campaign, and other professional endeavors. From playing Jonathan on 30 Rock, to voicing Baljeet on Disney's Phineas and Ferb, and even starring on the Broadway stage, the breadth of Maulik's roles speak to his talent and versatility. Alongside his acting career, he has dedicated himself to bringing change as a longtime advocate for the Asian American and Pacific Islander and LGBTQIA+ communities. He was appointed by President Obama to serve on the President's Advisory Commission on AAPIs and spearheaded the launch of the anti-bullying campaign acttochange.org during his term, an organization which he continues to chair today. In the October of 2019, Maulik released his first book, The Best at It, which received a number of accolades, including being named a 2020 Stonewall Honor Book. Let's give a virtual round of applause to actor, activist, and author Maulik Pancholy. And here to shape the conversation with him is Mihir Shah. Mihir just graduated from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill with a degree in communications and is currently a 2020 Venture for America Fellow. He's a proud member of what he claims to be the best YJA region, the Southeast, and is an avid storyteller, creative writer, and performer who hopes to one day rock overalls just as well as Baljeet. Without further ado, I'd like to give the stage to Maulik Pancholy and Mihir Shah.
Thank you, guys. Maulik, On behalf of the over 800 people who are tuning in right now, thank you so much for being here, man. It really means a lot. Really looking forward to speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm trying to figure out, I want to make sure that I can actually see. Yes, now I see you. Hi, how's it going? Congratulations on this day. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it. I can't believe how incredible this whole convention is that you guys are doing virtually. You had yoga this morning. You have a slumber party tonight. Is that right? I mean, this is incredible. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, the planning committee really turned around and put this awesome thing together. And yeah, it's incredibly impressive. And yeah, I mean, as soon as I figured out that you were actually Jane, and obviously my generation grew up watching Phineas and Ferb and 30 Rock and seeing you, and yeah, putting those two together and bringing you here has been, it's just really exciting. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with your career. Obviously, you're an actor, activist, and author. But before we jump into any of that, I think we should take an opportunity to sort of take a way back and just talk about your childhood growing up in America. You grew up before a lot of us were even born. Obviously, life. Yeah, right?
Just kidding. What are you talking about?
I know. It's weird to think about the fact that like Baljeet was older than us when we were watching him, but
hilarious. Yeah. Sorry. I feel like I cut you off.
I mean, I was just gonna say that, like, obviously you grew up in Ohio, Indian American, before there weren't that many Indian Americans in America, right? So I guess I was just wondering what was life like for you as a Jain who, growing up wanted to be an actor. That must have been a crazy experience.
Yeah. Well, so I can talk about a few things here. One, I grew up with a lot of the influence of Jainism. My mom's side of the family was subscribed to the Jain religion. My dad's side of the family was Hindu, so I grew up with both the influences of both religion. And for me, religion, to be totally honest, I know we're at the YJA convention here, but to me, religion is still somewhat of a question mark. I think of myself as a spiritual person for sure, but there were many things about Jainism that have had a profound influence on my life. And I would say, primarily, and I think the thing that Jainism is known for around the world, the idea of living a life of nonviolence, as little violence as possible, is something that has been a huge impact on not only how I move through the world, but I think on how I approach all of my work, whether it's as an actor or as an author, as an activist. So that, I just wanted to sort of chat about that little piece of it. In terms of very few Indian Americans, first of all, how old do you think I am, Mihir? No, just kidding. Don't answer that question. Obviously, when I was younger, there were far less Indian Americans in the United States than there are now. Asian Americans as a whole are the fastest growing racial demographic in the country. So our numbers are constantly increasing, which of course includes Indian Americans. But just to take it way back, so I was actually born in Ohio, but then we moved to Indiana when I was 2 years old, I think. And my parents tell a story about when we moved to Indiana, there were so few Indian Americans in this area we were living in that they actually opened up the phone book. Do you know what a phone book is, Mihir?
Yeah, I do.
They opened up the phone book and they looked for classic Indian last names, and that's how they found their first set of friends in Indiana. And even doing that, we would have to drive like 30 minutes to socialize with other Indian people. And by the way, those 4 or 5 families that we were all friends with when I was a very little kid have stayed really good friends with my family. And so I think that there was a sense of having to build your own community because there was not a larger community existing. But then when I was like 7 or 8, we moved to Tampa, Florida, and there was a much larger Indian community there. But I would think that this might be a similar experience to a lot of people of your very young generation. but even though there was a larger Indian community in Tampa, I sort of thought of my life as having these like multiple pockets. And I love the theme of your convention this year, progressing with purpose. And I think I think a large part of my own purpose, I can tie into some of the principles of Jainism. And one of those principles is, I think, the search for truth. And when I was a kid, I sort of felt like I had these 3 or 4 pockets of my identity, and they didn't really all meld together. So it was hard to be completely truthful in each sort of area of my life. So, I had the person at school who wanted to be more American, and to me, mistakenly, I thought American meant sort of this blanket Caucasian culture, whatever that even means. And then we had the weekend, which was like seeing Indian families, Indian American families, and there was like those 2 split. And then I had the third side, which was, I didn't even know how to talk about this when I was a kid, but discovering that I might be gay and feeling like I couldn't share that with anybody. So I had that piece of it. And then, of course, wanting to be an actor, which was like pretty different than any other Indian American kid that I was growing up with at the time. So I felt like I had all these little parts of my life. And I do think that as an adult, one of the things, in terms of progressing with purpose, has been seeing myself as a whole being and knowing that all those truths can coexist together. And that part of what I try to do with all of my work as an actor, as an activist, as an author, is encouraging other people to find what that truth is for themselves and know that it's okay to have all of it coexist at once.
Right. Yeah, I mean, your career has progressed in so many different ways, and I'm sure you found purpose in what you might have thought was unexpected ways upon reflection. And so, on a personal note, talking about identity, going back to that, what was it like coming out to your family and close friends when that happened? Obviously, traditionally and historically, there is a stigma in the Indian community about LGBTQ people. So what was that like?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So first of all, it took me forever to come out to even myself. And in terms of getting to be a keynote here at the YJA convention, I remember as a very little kid going to a Jain temple function. And there was an opportunity at the end of the function. There was a group of monks that had come over from India, and there was an opportunity for the youngsters to go talk to them. And I remember being like, I didn't even know how to express the fact that I was gay. When I was growing up, I didn't know a single out person in my community, and so I didn't even know sort of how to to really have the language around speaking about it. But I remember wanting to talk to one of the monks. I remember wanting to say, like, hey, I think this thing is going on with me, and I'm not sure what to do, and I'm not sure if this is okay, and I didn't do it. And I think that I had this fear of being shunned, and I didn't know where Jainism fell around that. I know that Jainism has a very at its sort of truest form, has a very strict view on sexual expression. And so that felt really scary to me. So I just want to say, on a personal level, getting to now keynote a YJA convention feels very full circle. It feels very big. I also know that Parag and Vaibhav, who are good friends, are speaking later. So I love that there's inclusivity in this new generation of Jainism. I think it was so hard for me, and I now, I think, want to make it easier for other young people by just being completely myself and being a role model, but also being able to speak about it through activism and through my art. I will also say that even though it took me a long time, I was by and large met with a lot of love from, I would say, like 99% of my community, my friends, my family, and being able to be my true self has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. I want to be completely honest to like anyone out there who might be struggling with this right now. There were some people in my life who made it really challenging. And there's some people who continue to make it really challenging. And I think that, I had this mistaken idea. And again, like I'm not very religious, so I don't know a lot about the Jain religion, but I had this mistaken idea that I wanted to cause as little pain in the world as possible. And there were some people who claimed that my sexuality was painful to them. And so for a while, I carried the burden of that guilt. But what I've come to learn as an adult is that that is pain that they are inflicting upon themselves, and that I actually have a responsibility to also take away pain from my own self, which is living a true life.
Right. The true definition of nonviolence is not being violent towards yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like you said, you know, like as a kid, I'm sure if you had seen some sort of representation on the shows that you were watching, you know, wanting to be an actor, I'm sure that would have, you know, helped you learn some of the language that you must have needed. But what I really got is that Jainism and Jain temples should have like a confessional booth like churches do. That'd be so great. I don't know why we don't use that. No. It's a different conversation. So, you know, going into that, you know, you talk about wanting to be your true self in everything you do, right? So as an actor in Hollywood, what were some of the challenges that you faced either generally or as an Indian American?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say for one thing, first of all, thank you for bringing up the representation fact. I mean, the thing is that there definitely was, and there continues to be a lack of representation, I think, around certainly stories of Indian Americans, certainly stories of Asian Americans as a whole, certainly LGBTQ characters. I mean, it's gotten so much better, but we have so much further still to go. I will say that so I knew I wanted to be an actor from a very young age. I mean, my mom tells me I told her when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be an actor, and I don't know for sure what that was about, but I do, you know, I look back now and I think that there was part of me as a kid that wanted so much to live in this fantasy world, that wanted to live in the world that I saw on television, or the world I saw in the movies, or in the theater when we'd go to the theater, or in books. Because I think that I also had a lot of uncomfortability around living in my own skin. And so I think my early aspirations around acting were about disappearing. Now, I think of acting more, of course you're transforming into another character and, you know, you're playing someone else, but I also think about like how much of my own experience, how much of my own perspective, how much of my own view on life can I bring to the role? And that's why I think, you know, we'll go see the same play with different actors, because every actor brings something very unique to every role they play. So that's just one thing. But I will say that in terms of representation, there's a lack of it, you know? And so when I first got out of school, out of undergrad, and I moved to LA shortly after, I sort of had, by the time, like going through college, I sort of developed this idea that I wasn't Indian in a way, because all the roles that I was getting to play in college were mostly, you know, written for white people. They were mostly written by white playwrights. When I would turn on the TV, it was mostly white actors. And I was like, well, if I want to be an actor, I'm going to have to look like what I see on TV. And so it sounds so crazy, but I think I started to sort of forget in a way, like who I was culturally, my heritage, my skin color. And then when I first got to LA, being Indian was kind of the only thing casting directors saw in me, you know? And so my very first parts were really painful things that I'm not proud of having to play. I did a TV show where I played a foreign exchange student who was wearing a turban and had an accent, and all of those things, by the way, are not negative. You know, I think wearing a turban is beautiful if you're wearing it for the right reason, but I was wearing it on the show so that the other characters could make fun of the way I dressed. And so,
Right.
So that was challenging. I mean, Hollywood has gotten a lot better, and I've certainly tried to do the work that I can do to push back and play roles that I think challenge stereotypes and give more voice to the community, and have are not the butt of jokes. But it's definitely was a challenge in my early career.
Yeah, I think so much of representation has to do with almost teaching others what we sort of you know, what our truth is and what our lives are really like. And I remember in college when I started doing improv, one of the first scenes I did on stage was I used like a Indian accent that was, you know, pretty stereotypical, and everybody loved it. But I felt so much shame afterwards, because I was like, wow, I got this platform to be able to do comedy, and the first thing I do is this Indian accent. That's not me. So and they didn't know that, right? So when I made that clear to my team, it was very clear how much that meant to me. And
I so appreciate your honesty around that. So I studied improv when I first moved to LA. and I was like moving really quickly through these improv classes. I mean, I don't say that as like I'm just like, but then I got to sort of a one of the higher level classes where we had to write our own material, and I wasn't doing that well in the class. And so one day I pulled out a cousin from India, like a made up cousin from India, and I did this crazy accent, and everyone was laughing. And I remember the teacher came up to me afterwards, and she was like, "Yeah," she's like, "You're using yourself, but that's really great." And I actually left the class after that because I was like, "That's actually not myself. That's who you guys want me to be." So yeah, I understand that and I relate to that. Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah, of course. I think it's so important because especially like in a college bubble in a liberal town, it's easy to forget that the world that we are living in is not necessarily the world that exists outside. So yeah, and I guess moving on, obviously the most exciting part of your career to me was Phineas and Ferb. I love that show. I know I'm not the only one listening who absolutely loved that show. And I got to say, before Phineas and Ferb, I can't think of any well-known Indian characters on an animated show besides Apu from The Simpsons, which obviously is controversial and stereotypical for its own reasons. So I guess my question to you is like, when you started that show and when you were first asked to do that character, what was the process like of shaping and creating that character over time?
Yeah, well, so I was doing a TV series called Weeds at the time. And I think 30 Rock might have started, or we were just beginning it. And the creators of Phineas and Ferb, they'd written this character. They knew that they wanted an Indian American actor to play the role. Actually, I don't know that it was fully. I don't know if they wanted someone of Indian descent, but because I think there was a woman in England who might have also been up for the part. And so they had me come in, and they were like, "Yeah, it's gonna be a young boy." So I kind of went in with just like a young boy's voice or whatever. And then like they were in LA and I was in New York, so I'm just like in a sound booth. And they're like, how high can your voice go? I'm a little tired today, so I don't know if I could do it. But I was like, we're just getting higher and higher and higher. And then finally, like when I left that session, I was like, wait, so and they're like, yeah, that's what it's gonna be. Like, I landed the role, and then Baljeet became this crazy character. It's been so much fun. I mean, that character, we like you mentioned, we started that before maybe some of your audience members were even born. We started recording that, I think, in 2006. And I think the first episode might have aired in 2008, just because animation takes a little while to come out. And we have a movie coming out in August that I literally just finished from recording some stuff for like a month ago. So I've been actively recording on Phineas and Ferb for 14 years. Is that right? And and I think it will probably go on. I think we'll probably do some more movies, hopefully, down the line. But it's been an incredible thing. I know we'll talk about this later, but I wrote a book for young people. And as part of promoting that book, I did a massive book tour around the country, and I visited middle schools all over the United States. And sometimes I'd go to these middle school auditoriums and there'd be like 700 kids in the audience. And I'd say like, I play Baljeet on Phineas and Ferb. And these kids would be like, oh my God. And so to know that this character has made such an impact on young people, and that they've fallen in love with like what you said, an Indian American character, and a character that I don't think we'd really seen on network cartoons before that, is really powerful. And I do have so many parents that come up to me and say how meaningful it is to them to be able to see their kids watching someone who looks like them on a cartoon. And by the way, that's, to me, is also sad. I mean, it's amazing, but it's also like, well, wouldn't it be great if there were some more real people they could also relate to on TV and not just cartoon characters? And I'll throw out that being in the animated world, then I went on to do Sanjay and Craig on Nickelodeon. And Sanjay was such an amazing part to play because I think he was the first, as far as I know, the first lead Indian American character ever on a network cartoon. And he was an interesting character because his mom was Caucasian, his dad was from India, so he was biracial. And while we played with that, honestly, like the most driving thing behind that character was just that he was a 12 or 13-year-old boy who wanted to do what all 12 or 13-year-old boys do, which is like fart and talk about butts. So I hope it's okay I said that on a YJA call.
I'm sure it is. We all fart and we all have butts, so we're all good. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And I want to keep talking to you about your acting career, but we should probably move on given time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if anyone's listening and if you have further questions about anything you're hearing, just jot them down. We'll open up a Q&A at the end that we can totally talk more about. So yeah, just jumping from acting to activism, obviously you're going back to the whole progressing with purpose. You spent so much time probably getting into acting and getting into Hollywood. How did you begin working with President Obama on his advisory commission?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an interesting thing about finding, I think, purpose in your life. I never, I didn't sort of imagine, well, first of all, I didn't imagine myself really doing animated series. When I went to school to be an actor, I was like, I envisioned a world of like movies and Broadway. And honestly, like when I went to theater undergrad, I think people kind of poo-pooed on television. It was kind of like, oh, TV acting is like not an elevated art form. And to be honest, I think TV is now where some of the most exciting work is happening. And certainly in terms of the change in diversity, I think TV is breaking far more ground than movies or even the theater world is, to be honest. And I also certainly didn't think I was going to work in politics. Like it just was not something that was on my radar. I will say that I'm lucky because I had great role models. My parents were very active in their community. My grandparents, my grandfather, who was Jain, was very socially involved. And I remember he would tell me stories about during Hindu-Muslim riots in India, how he and my grandmother would shelter Muslims in their home to keep them from being the victims of violence. And so I had these things sort of to, I had role models of a way that I wanted to live my life. But the activism piece of it was sort of handed to me. And I will say that, for all the people listening out there who are looking to find purpose in your life, I think part of finding that purpose is staying open to what the world is offering you and knowing who you are and finding purpose in who you are as a person that allows you to stay open to the opportunities that are coming your way. And what really started to happen was because there was so little visibility of Asian American actors on television, that just being on TV meant I was suddenly being asked by so many Asian American and Pacific Islander organizations to come speak, not unlike today, to come speak, at their conventions or at their events. And the same was true with the LGBTQ organizations. And so it was very interesting because I had spent a lot of time in my life trying to not be those things, trying to be straight or trying to be less Indian so I could have this acting career. And suddenly these organizations were actually asking me to be more of myself and to speak about who I am and to be a role model for other people. And I think because I had these role models in my parents and my grandparents who had taught me about civic duty, my mom was born in Gandhi's ashram in India. So I had that in my upbringing. I rose up to the cause. Like I knew that I couldn't let my own fears about who I was get in the way of doing good in the world. And so I started to get more and more involved with these nonprofit and social policy organizations. And of course, the more I learned about the issues that were facing our communities and the communities that I belong to, including the LGBTQ community, the more work I wanted to do. And it was through doing that work that I got appointed by President Obama to serve on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. Particularly when you're talking about, not running away from who you are to sort of find success and find that purpose, but rather looking inwards and really bringing yourself to light to figure out why you're meant to do what you're meant to do. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I saw one of your sessions later on, someone's going to be talking about, how our cultures can be somewhat career driven. And I just want to say that I certainly was that kid. Like I knew I wanted to be an actor and I was like, I'm going to go to theater school and then I'm going to go to grad school and this is what it's going to be. But I think within finding those, I guess I would say physical purposes, I think there's also finding that spiritual purpose that allows you to stay open to the potential changes in your life that might come your way.
Totally. Yeah. Wow, that's great. And, obviously right now you're currently still involved with activism, with Act to Change, which started on that advisory commission. So what was that process like, and why did you sort of choose to start that when it happened?
Yeah, so when I got to the White House, the previous commission had started doing some anti-bullying work, and I was kind of looking at the portfolio of things that were priorities for the administration, and I was like, this feels pretty important to me, because as a kid, I remembered feeling different, and I remembered feeling other, and I remember feeling ostracized. And so it felt like a natural fit to jump into that space and try to work against that. But our job at the White House was very White House focused. It was to increase access to federal programs to the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. So to say like, hey, do you guys know that there are these rules around DACA? Have you applied? Do you know how to get support around immigration issues? But then it was also to go out to the Asian American and Pacific Islander community and say, where do you guys need help that the government is not helping? And so we were hearing from organizations on the ground like the SICK Coalition and the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Council on American Islamic Relations. They had all done these independent studies that showed that Asian American kids were experiencing very high rates of bullying. But there was also a lack of reporting to things like city governments, state governments, the federal government for sure. So what we did is we did 29 listening sessions around the country. And we met with parents, we met with students, we met with educators, and we talked about how bullying was presenting in the communities. And what we found is that it was true, that Asian American kids were being bullied at very, very high rates. And there was also a culture that was suppressing reporting for many reasons. There was the just put your head down and do good work. It doesn't matter if someone calls you a name. There was the fear of government from some immigrant communities. There was, I think, a culture of like, we don't need to make noise and call attention to ourselves, all these sort of things. And so that's how Act to Change was born. It was born as a White House campaign that was to elevate the conversation around how bullying was presenting in our communities and to get people to report it. And then in 2017, when the White House turned over, my tenure at the White House could have gone on for through September, I think, of 2017. But it became very clear, and I hope it's okay to be somewhat political on here, but it became very clear that the rhetoric coming out of the White House was not in alignment with what we were trying to do with Act to Change. So we could not, in good conscience, go to a Muslim family or go to a Sikh American family that wore a turban and say, hey, if you're being bullied, report it to the federal government. Well, at the same time, the federal government was saying, we're trying to create a ban on people who look like you from coming to this country. And so I resigned my post at the White House, and we moved Act to Change outside of the White House, and Act to Change is now a national nonprofit, and we're continuing to do the good work.
Yeah, I mean, sort of on that same page about things changing with transitioning and just with time. Bullying obviously looks a lot different now than it was 20 years ago. So what are some of the insights that you've gained through your nonprofit about bullying in general?
Yeah, that's such a big question. Thank you. I think the biggest thing that's changed is the internet. And I think certainly like in this time of everything being on the internet, we're seeing, we don't have a lot of data yet around this, obviously, because it's so new that we're not able to do the studies around it. But I think in the last 4 months, anecdotally, what we're seeing a lot of is a rise in online bullying. And I think if you flip open any one of the social media platforms, you can start to see the trolling and the negativity. It's interesting, our communities, as integrated as we are into American society, and as American as we are without having to be anything other than who we are, we also, I think, in moments in history, realize how conditional our relationship with being seen as American is. So post 9/11, people who look like you and me were targeted. I think with the coronavirus starting, we certainly saw Southeast Asian and East Asian communities being targeted. So I think that those are things that we're starting to address too, is like how, I think that, and this comes back very much to what I do as an actor and as an author, is how do we get our stories, how do we get that representation out in there so that people don't see us as other, so that we are fully integrated? Because I think that will help lessen hatred. It will help lessen bullying if we all see each other as just human beings.
Right. And so much of that comes back to what you said is representation, which I think is a really great transition into your work as an author with the best edit, which I've got right here. I'm a few chapters in. I have a ton of questions that I can't hit you with all of them right now. Obviously, this book is about a gay Indian American kid growing up in Indiana, much like yourself, and about his struggle trying to find a place and a purpose. Correct me if I'm wrong, the story, basically the premise is that his grandfather gives him some advice, which is find something to be the best at. And it's his sort of struggle trying to find that, and his anxiety around, what if I can't find that? I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of see this book as a culmination of so many different parts of my life. And by the way, I'm not done yet. I have so many things that I still want to do. But I think recognizing that there was a lack of representation and wanting to create that for young people, and then working at the White House and seeing how that lack of representation can have very real effects. There's obviously the psychological effect, but I do think not having our stories in the world allows things like bullying to thrive. And so I was talking with two friends of mine who have this amazing company called In This Together Media, whose mission is to improve diversity in books for young people. And they were like, we know you do a lot of work around diversity in television, but there's also a need for it in books. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, I don't know if I can write a book. That seems like such a big undertaking. But then I went home and I read a ton of books for young people, which I hadn't read in a long time. And I started to feel like there was a story in here that I wanted to tell. And so that's how the best edit really came about. And it is definitely a work of fiction, but it is also so much rooted in my own experiences and drawn from so many people in my own life. And at its core, I think there are so many similarities between me and Rahul Kapoor, who's the lead character of the book. And like you said, he's a 12-year-old Indian American kid who's being bullied around his cultural and sexual identity at school. But I also think that he has his own internal fears around just being who he is. And his journey to try to be the best at something is really a journey to trying to prove his self-worth. And I don't want to give anything away because hopefully people will read the book. But like you said, he's terrified that if he can't find that thing that he can prove he's the best at, that his whole world will fall apart. And so it's a process of him discovering that he actually has to be the best at being himself.
Yeah, and I will say for anyone listening who has not read this book yet, it's so powerful to be able to read something, even if it is for children, to read something into like that immediately on page one, feel completely immersed because it's so relatable. And it was just such a great feeling to be able to open the book up and be like, wow, this is a story that feels like it's just so close to the heart, so
Yeah.
thank you so much.
What's been so like heartwarming is because a number of adults have read it, and I get messages all the time. I actually got a letter just this morning that brought tears to my eyes, and it's from probably someone I think about your age who read it, who just I don't know what it was like for you, but I certainly didn't ever read a book that had a lead character who looked like me in it when I was growing up. And when I went on this book tour to middle schools, I would ask kids, I would just say, raise your hand if any of you are reading a book with a lead Indian American character in it. And those same 700 kids who love Baljeet would be like, no hands, and right. So, I just know that generationally it hasn't changed that much, but it's time for change. We need more stories out there. And I think there's oh my gosh, I hope I get her name right. I think it's Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. I think that's right. And I want to look it up, and I don't want to be wrong about this, but she wrote a very powerful essay many years ago about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and how books can be a mirror for a young person to see themselves and how powerful that is. How it can also be a window to see someone else's experience, and how at its best, it's a sliding glass door, and you actually get to experience what that other character's experience. And I think that is how we build empathy, is that if you can experience what someone else's emotional life is and see them as a human being, then you realize you were just the same.
the power of storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Sadly, I think we're pretty much wrapping up our time for conversation here, which is a bummer for so many reasons. But before we jump right into Q&A, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I just thank you so much for having me here. This was like such an incredible opportunity. I'm like so grateful. You guys did such an incredible job planning the whole day. I feel like I'm just this one little piece of such a beautiful event. So thank you. And I would just say to anyone who's tuning in, I'm just knowing what the topic of your convention was made me reflect on my own life a bit. And I think that, we all want to live purposeful lives, and we all want to feel like our lives have purpose. And I would just say that within that, I do think that the key to finding that is always being true to who you are, and trusting that who you are is enough. And so just encourage you to continue to always be yourself and know that the purpose will unfold.
Thank you so much, Maulik. Yeah, just a huge honor to have you, man. And thank you so much for your words, and hearing your story is just as empowering as the stories that you put out in your art. So thank you. I hate that this is been the quickest hour of my life. But I think it's just about time to wrap up. But again, man, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. It's empowering and inspirational for, I know, not just me, but for everybody listening. I've gotten a lot out of it personally, and I'm sure everyone else has. So thank you so much. I'll definitely be finishing this up soon. And yeah, man, just thank you so much for your work and for everything you've done.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here today.
Appreciate it.